The video that you are about to see is one of a three-part video series that I have here on my YouTube channel. It's essentially an HSP 101 mini course that I've created. There's one all about the highly sensitive trait, there's one about the highly sensitive brain, and then I made another one all about how to have a healthy mindset around being a highly sensitive person. So make sure to check out the other two videos if you're interested as well. All three of these videos are actually course modules that I've taken directly out of my online program that I've built for highly sensitive people to help guide them from a survival state to a thriving state in their health, relationships, and career. There are over 160 video modules at this point in this course, all on numerous topics such as boundary setting, how to get quality sleep, self-care, relationships, your career as a highly sensitive person, and so much more. I'm Tiara Ariel, a highly sensitive person myself and a certified coach, and I've been educating myself for several years now on the highly sensitive trait, the nervous system, psychology, the subconscious mind, healthy relationship dynamics, holistic wellness, as well as working with real-life HSPs in my coaching practice. And with all of this knowledge that I've accumulated, as well as pulling from my own life experience as a sensitive person, healing myself, and building my dream life, I create content for highly sensitive people who are determined to thrive. So if you fit that description, I hope you will become a subscriber if you're not already and join the movement of highly sensitive people who are reclaiming their lives, becoming their own sources of strength, and stepping into their power. And if you're interested in learning more about my online program for highly sensitive people, where this video series is being pulled from, you can visit my website links in the description. My goal is to help as many highly sensitive people as I can build a life for themselves that is authentically supportive and fulfilling, and to help them believe that that is in fact possible, that they are worthy of it, and that it is safe to step into that vision for themselves. I hope this HSP 101 video series helps you better understand yourself as a highly sensitive person, feel a sense of empowerment, and helps you renew and strengthen any shaky belief that you may have about whether or not it's actually possible to thrive as a highly sensitive person. Now, this is going to be a three-part module, and the first one that we're going to be focusing on is part one, which is defining the trait. Deeply and thoroughly understand what it means to be an HSP. Why is this important? Because being an HSP is a significant part of who you are. You have unique experiences, likes, dislikes, and personalities. No two highly sensitive people, or two people for that matter, are exactly alike, but highly sensitive people as a group are simply built differently than non-highly sensitive people, and this is why trying to fit into what works for the majority of people is not what works for us. And I always say that the biggest key to anyone's happiness is self-awareness. The more you learn about yourself, the more power you have to make choices based on what will fulfill, support, and fuel you as an individual, which translates to personal health and happiness. So I would encourage you throughout these HSP 101 modules to pause the video anytime you find something interesting and/or that reminds you of yourself, and write it down. Anytime a light bulb goes off in your head learning about these things and connecting them to your own past experiences, take note of that. By the end of parts 1, 2, and 3, I'm hoping that you'll have a thorough understanding of what the highly sensitive trait is and how it shows up in your experience, for the sole purpose of helping you gain a deeper level of self-understanding for the sake of your own health and happiness in life. Okay, so what does it mean to be an HSP? First off, it's important that you understand that high sensitivity is defined as a personality trait, not a disorder or disease of any kind. Highly sensitive people are of any age, any gender, any race, and any origin. HSPs have a biological and genetic difference to their nervous system. It is a trait that is scientifically referred to as sensory processing sensitivity. This trait makes us more sensitive or responsive to our environment. This means that the highly sensitive person is more affected by and in tune with their surroundings. In other words, we respond to what's around us more readily or with more intensity than people who have a nervous system that is not highly sensitive. Just like a microphone or a guitar amp that is tuned way up to pick up every little tiny sound and amplify it, versus one that is set to a less sensitive setting. As a result of having a nervous system that is dialed up, like the microphone, and that is more attuned to and picking up on what's around them, HSPs often notice, feel, and process stimuli in their environment, such as sights, sounds, tastes, smells, textures, sensations, other people's emotions, etc., in more detail and depth than a non-highly sensitive person. Because there are a handful of genes that have been found to be associated with this trait, high sensitivity is considered to be genetic. So it's likely that you inherited this trait from a family member of yours. Fun fact, my immediate family of 4 happens to all be highly sensitive people. There are actually 10 genes that can essentially predict high sensitivity, which implies a strong indication that this trait is indeed genetic. We know that the trait is innate, meaning that it's something you are born with. We also know that the highly sensitive trait exists in about 15 to 20% of the population, so that's about 1 in every 5 people, which in today's world population would mean that there are about 1.185 billion of us HSPs on the planet, which is a pretty cool statistic to think about, especially if you've been feeling alone in your experience of being a highly sensitive person. There are plenty of other people out in the world that can relate to that experience. We also know that the trait is present in more than 100 different species, not just humans. For example, fish, dogs, cats, deer, monkeys, and insects have also shown this trait. This trait is also not a new trait, meaning it's not that we are suddenly hearing more about it over the last decade because it suddenly appeared. It has likely, if not always, been present in previous years of human history. We just did not have a name for it or an awareness of it yet. Psychologist Dr. Elaine Ariel is the one who originally coined the term highly sensitive person and studied and published information on the trait. Alongside of her, there have been other scientists and psychologists studying the trait around the world using slightly different terminology. Now I want to go over some common misconceptions about high sensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity. High sensitivity is not the same thing as introversion. Actually, about 70% of highly sensitive people are introverted, with about 30% being extroverted. Also, there is a stigma around high sensitivity only being present in women for the fact that sensitivity as a trait has been considered feminine. High sensitivity is definitely not only present in women. There are just as many highly sensitive men as there are highly sensitive women. It just may seem that there are more highly sensitive women because highly sensitive men may feel especially self-conscious about having the trait because sensitivity has been considered a feminine trait. This is something that I'm hoping that we'll be able to change as more people become educated about the trait. Highly sensitive men, just as much as highly sensitive women, deserve to be understood and be able to learn about themselves and discuss the trait openly with others. High sensitivity is also not a disorder or a dysfunction of any kind. It is a completely normal difference to our nervous system, a naturally occurring genetic variant, and considered to be a personality trait, just like introversion or extroversion. Now, some of you may be wondering what is the best way to word that you have this trait. Well, it's important to remember that the abbreviation HSP stands for highly sensitive person. So you could say, I am an HSP, I am a highly sensitive person, I am highly sensitive, or I have high sensitivity, the trait, or I have sensory processing sensitivity, the trait. The incorrect way to word this would be to say I have HSP, because that doesn't really make sense, right? Because you'd be saying I have highly sensitive person. I am HSP doesn't make sense either, nor does I am SPS, because SPS is a trait. I hope those differences make sense to you, and I just wanted to include this for anyone who, like me, was taught always to have proper grammar, and this is just a pet peeve of mine. So for those of you who are interested, if you want to have proper grammar when speaking to someone about your trait, go for the phrases in blue. All right, so since Dr. Elaine Ariel was the first one to really dive deep into defining this trait, I want to go over her way of describing the fundamental elements of what makes someone a highly sensitive person. This acronym is DOES, D-O-E-S. The D stands for depth of processing. Whether you are conscious of it or not, you are processing all the information you're taking in to a greater depth, comparing and relating it to past experiences. This can also translate to taking longer to make decisions and making them more carefully. The O in the acronym stands for overstimulation. We have a tendency to be overwhelmed by too much stimuli if we are more sensitive to the stimuli around us and process that stimuli to a greater depth. The E in the acronym stands for emotional depth and empathy. We as a group are more affected by both positive and negative experiences in comparison to non-HSPs, and this is due to some crucial differences within our brain, which we're going to talk more about in part 2. The parts of our brains that process other people's feelings are more active, and we experience the emotional aspects of life with more vividness. More on these things later. The S in the acronym stands for sensitivity to subtleties in the environment. We notice what's going on around us with more acute awareness and process that information to a greater depth, not so much that our actual senses are biologically heightened. So it's not that we have superhuman senses, that anything is different or abnormal or superpowered in terms of our taste buds, hearing, eyesight, etc. It's just that we process the sensory information coming into our awareness in more depth. As a photographer, I really like to use the camera as an example to explain some of these qualities of being an HSP. I'll simplify this and break this down into terms that anyone can understand because I really do think it's a great way to conceptualize the trait. So a camera has several parts to it to make it work. There is a lens attached to the frame or the body of the camera, the big black box that houses the internal parts of the camera. And inside that frame, on the other side of the lens, on the receiving end, there is a tiny little screen called the image sensor. This image sensor is sensitive to light information, meaning it reads the light coming in through the lens and makes sense of it, forming the picture that you get when you press the capture button. The capture button literally captures the incoming light information that is coming in through the lens at the exact moment in time that you press the button. That's how a camera works. Now, if we were able to imagine ourselves as the camera, the lens represents our eyesight, or any one of our senses, taste, touch, smell, sounds, etc. And the image sensor represents our brain and our nervous system. It's not that our lens is somehow better quality or more powerful than the lens of a non-HSP. It's that our image sensor, the thing receiving and reading the information that's coming in, is more sensitive. And to anyone who actually knows cameras out there, it would be like saying that our ISO is higher. This is the number that corresponds to how we've set the sensitivity of our image sensor. So, if our ISO is higher, our sensitivity to the light information coming into our lens is higher, which, if you want to take this metaphor even further, means that it would take less light coming in from the outside world to overexpose our image or overwhelm our image sensor with light, meaning we'd be overwhelming our brain and nervous system with information. If you overexpose the camera's image sensor, you'd get an image that's way too bright. And this is a symbol for our feeling of overwhelm when we're taking in too much information. Not only did I just give you a crash course in camera functions and operations, this is a fantastic analogy for how our systems function and operate as HSPs. The thing inside of us that is picking up on and making sense of the sensory input coming into our experience is more sensitive than 80 to 85% of other people, which means we may detect more things and also means we can more easily and unintentionally overwhelm our sensors if we are flooded with information. Speaking of being flooded with information, this could be a great time to take a short break from absorbing the learning material if you need one. One of the most rewarding things about making the video modules in this course is seeing and hearing about how much they are helping other real-life HSPs. I'll leave a couple of my favorite comments that I've ever received from program members up on the screen here. And if you'd like, you can pause the video, take a little break, and resume the course module whenever you're ready. So you may be wondering, why does this trait exist in the first place? Where did it come from? It's clearly got its benefits and its challenges, and we understand it's a normal variation in the population. It also seems to be consistently in the minority of each species that it's found in. Why is that? Seems kind of intentional, doesn't it? From an evolutionary standpoint, a trait like this, if it wasn't beneficial or didn't serve a good purpose for survival, would not continue to exist. This goes along with the theory that this trait was formed as part of an evolutionary process. The trait most likely came about as a result of an evolutionary process because the trait itself serves a vital function or purpose to the survival of its community. We are the pause and check members of society. This is why, from a scientific standpoint, HSPs only make up a small percentage, 15 to 20% of the group, because if everyone had a heightened awareness to every subtle change, sight, noise, smell in the environment, it wouldn't be a helpful skill set to have, and everyone would always be on high alert and thinking long and hard and carefully about making decisions, which would make progress as a whole for the community a longer or more stressful or chaotic process.
But if a small portion of us can take the watchtower advisory role to the rest of the group, it becomes highly valuable. Like this owl here perching on a tree branch, we have a unique perspective. We are highly observant, insightful, sensitive, and quick to notice small details. Our strength lies in our acute awareness of what's going on around us, and this is fundamentally what makes us highly sensitive people. Think of a small group of indigenous people trying to start a community and build a village. Their goal is to keep everyone safe and healthy and happy. The majority of the group can focus on getting things done, like tending to the livestock, building homes, gathering resources, etc. And they're able to keep their heads down and focus on the tasks in front of them because they aren't as bothered or distracted by worries of anything else going on around them. While the minority, the sensitive ones, can be the ones on guard, watching for potential threats coming into the village, observing their work, and pointing out when something goes overlooked or unnoticed, using their insights to help keep the group organized, efficient, protected, etc. Or even feeling out the intentions of newcomers that enter the village, paying attention to body language and facial cues, or moderating negotiations and conflicts between people. Now, if you made these two groups switch roles, the whole community would fall apart. The HSPs would become quickly drained by trying to drown out the busy environment around them in order to focus. And the non-HSPs would frankly not be as effective at detecting these nuanced pieces of information because they simply aren't built to be as aware of them. HSPs and non-HSPs alike have strengths and weaknesses, and we are meant to function as a whole community working in unison. And it's important to know that the ones who have these incredibly heightened senses have different needs, like a less stimulating environment to rest in to be able to function, than do the ones who aren't as sensitive to their environments. We need different kinds of jobs, different work schedules. We are built slightly differently, and all of us need to account for those differences. While we may drain easily, we as HSPs have highly valuable skills to offer ourselves and the people around us, but we can't do so if we are trying to force ourselves into the role best suited for a non-HSP, or expect to behave or function like one. It's important that everyone is in a role that they can thrive in, for the sake of their own well-being and the well-being of the whole community. And it's also important that these different types of people are properly supported in their different types of needs. Because science didn't become consciously aware of this trait until recent years, this distinctive difference between needs and compatibilities of HSPs compared to non-HSPs may not have been part of the community conversation. Thus, what has happened in our society, where HSPs have been pushed into the mainstream of what is expected of non-HSPs, a way that just isn't best suited for us. Just like everyone is unique and has different skills and needs, we as a group of HSPs have our own unique set of skills and needs that are important for everyone to know about. We as HSPs need to know these things about ourselves so that we can understand ourselves, and those around us need to know about these things too so that they can also understand how to best support us. Which is why learning about the trait from a non-judgmental viewpoint and with an open mind can be a huge benefit for someone with this trait, and truthfully, anyone who interacts with someone with the trait. And it's arguably vital information to have to be able to live healthfully and happily as a highly sensitive person. So in order to understand fully, let's talk a little bit about the nervous system. Just to be clear, sensory processing sensitivity, or the HSP trait and the qualities it possesses, is understood at this point to stem from having a sensitive central nervous system. The nervous system actually has two branches, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Our central nervous system is the one involving the spine and the brain, and the peripheral nervous system is the one with all the nerve branches to our limbs and organs. So in this photo here, the central nervous system are the red areas, and the peripheral nervous system are the blue areas. So technically speaking, if you're interested, as far as we know, the highly sensitive trait shows up in the central nervous system, the one responsible for processing incoming stimuli and for sending out a signal in response. The trait is not necessarily known to be in the peripheral nervous system, the one that's carrying out the autonomic reflexes and motor movements. But in general, throughout the course, I'll just be referring to this sensitive central nervous system as the nervous system. But I just wanted to clarify what that actually means. So you can think of the nervous system as a whole as our communication system of the body, decoding incoming messages and then delivering messages between our brains and other organs and limbs. In an HSP, it's like the volume of those incoming communications are louder. The gauges are more sensitive. more aware of smaller, quieter messages than a non-HSP's microphone may pick up or register. Our brains are constantly processing all of these messages, big and small. Our threshold for literal and metaphorical background noise is lower. Our tolerance for stress and pain is lower. Our tanks of sensory inputs fill up faster. But we also gather more information, which can be really useful. It would be like asking one person to look in a word search only for words with 6 or more letters, and asking a different person to look for all of the words of any word length that they can find in the same word search. The second person may take longer to finish the task and be more drained afterwards, but they will have gathered a lot more information and been more thorough while they were searching. Another great way to visualize this is if you picture your perception of the world as a butterfly net. Our butterfly net is like a normal net, but with a much tighter weave. A non-HSP can wave their butterfly net into the air and will definitely catch some stuff, but it will mostly be the big stuff. An HSP can wave their more tightly woven net into the air and catch not only the big stuff, but the small stuff too. These little things don't slip through our net of awareness as much as they do for the majority of other people's nets. This means we catch the big and the little things, but it also means we have more information to sort through, and dragging that very full butterfly net around may get kind of heavy and tiring sometimes. Thriving as an HSP is all about regulating the stream of incoming information and balancing how much time is spent gathering and processing and how much time is spent recharging. You want to utilize the highly valuable skill sets that come with a trait, but without burning them out by overworking the body and mind past its desired and optimal threshold. It's almost like the HSP brain and body were built for either doing small amounts over a long period of time, working at a slower pace, or working in shorter, highly energized and passionate bursts, with a great deal of rest in between. I think this is part of why HSPs tend to enjoy working at a consistently slower pace, with a less demanding job, or doing project-based work and pouring passion into their projects in bursts. We tend to do better working shorter workdays, in environments we can control or at least minimize the stimulation within, like working from home or in a private office space or in small communal workspaces with coworkers that we really feel comfortable with and energized by. We also tend to like working or spending time in nature, and that makes a lot of sense. Spending time in nature is proven to reduce stress, soothe our nervous system, and keep us grounded. And keeping in tone with this theme of connecting to plants and nature, a plant analogy is often used when explaining the highly sensitive trait. People have had varying scores on the HSP test when they've taken it, so it would appear that some people may consider themselves to be only moderately sensitive versus highly sensitive. There is some debate on whether this trait exists on a spectrum, with varying degrees of sensitivity, or whether it's more black and white, as in you're either an HSP or you're not. And while as of now the research is showing to be more on the side of you're either an HSP or you're not, there still may be some people who consider themselves to be only moderately sensitive to their environment. To depict this idea of different levels of sensitivity to an environment, authors have often used dandelions, tulips, and orchids as an analogy, especially when talking about sensory processing sensitivity among children. A dandelion is the kind of plant that can grow and remain stable in a lot of different types of weather conditions and environments and is more common. An orchid is the kind of flower that takes very specific conditions in order to grow and remain stable and is also more rare, while a tulip would lie somewhere in between these two extremes. I don't believe this analogy is meant to depict HSPs as more beautiful, likening non-HSPs to weeds, or to say that HSPs are high maintenance and that dandelions are more likely to thrive in life. I think the point of using these flowers as an analogy is simply to point out the different types of environments each type of flower is best suited to, and to acknowledge the fact that they do need different types of conditions to thrive, and how common or rare they are in terms of population percentage. So don't get too caught up in the connotations of each flower. Just understand that there are benefits and challenges to being any type of flower, and that our environment is an important factor. Which brings me to a quote that is absolutely one of my favorites when it comes to educating about the trait. It goes, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower." This is the kind of mentality you should have going into your own transformation and working towards a thriving state from a not doing so hot survival state. When a good gardener or florist or plant enthusiast notices a plant not doing well in its current conditions, they don't throw out the plant saying it's defective. They simply understand that plant's unique needs and then adjust its resources and environment accordingly. Some plants need more water, some plants need less. Some plants need more sunlight, some need less. Some thrive in humid environments and others need dry environments. To think of yourself the same way as the florist thinks of its plants. You are not damaged goods simply because you haven't been thriving in your current conditions. You just need to figure out what your unique needs are as an individual and then adjust your environment accordingly. When a highly sensitive person is in a supportive environment, has their needs met, is thriving, healthy and happy, or otherwise doing well and able to enjoy and express all of their wonderful qualities, they can often be described as being observant, sensitive to other people's feelings and points of view, creative, insightful, easily find joy and appreciate the little things in life, successful in their workplace, using their attention to detail, sympathy towards others, observational skills, and creativity, and other awesome traits to their advantage, and the advantage of the projects they are working on and those they are working with and for. They can be described as being a good listener, being present with other people when they speak, and really taking to heart what the other person is saying while paying attention to their emotions. Feeling good in and physically in tune with their own body, using their sensitive senses and depth of processing within their brain, as well as tapping into their intuition for their own benefit. They can be even-tempered, emotionally aware, and stable, generally calm and grounded, and confident in themselves and their own abilities. These are all things you are more than capable of if you are in a thriving state, getting your needs met, and living a lifestyle that suits you as a highly sensitive individual. We know from studies that because HSPs are so connected to and affected by their environments, the possible outcomes they have from being in a supportive environment are actually greater than someone who isn't as affected by their environment, like a non-highly sensitive person. But this works in both ways. If we aren't in a supportive environment, if we are not in a thriving state but in a survival mode instead, barely getting our needs met, or worse, not at all getting our needs met, and living in such a way that does not support who we authentically are as sensitive people, we can end up being in a very stressed state and not feel like we exude these qualities listed here at all, but instead end up showing up as a less ideal version of ourselves. When we are overwhelmed, taxed emotionally, mentally, or physically, we have to figure out some ways to cope. So we learn to hide or subdue our sensitivities and end up tuning out the insight and gut feelings we are getting internally and from our environment. And we just try to do things the way majority of others around us do it. But that doesn't work for us. What works for someone with a not so sensitive nervous system will not work for someone who has a very sensitive nervous system. In a stressed state, we develop coping mechanisms and survival strategies, and as a result, we end up more closely resembling someone who can be irritable. From emotional overload, unsupported blood sugars, mental overstimulation, essentially anything that neglects our needs or fries our nervous system and brain. We can have trouble concentrating and having poor memory from mental overload. We can actually be insensitive, numbing our own emotions and our empathy for others as a way to cope. And we can also actually be non-observant and having selective noticing or hearing. We literally put on blinders and shut down and tune out as a way to not take in more sensory information and emotional stimuli that we just simply cannot handle when we're already overwhelmed and not getting our own needs met. We can be short-tempered, having low patience, and can be easily upset. This can be a result of many things and is similar to irritability. If we don't get the proper amount of sleep needed for our highly active brains and sensitive nervous systems to fully recover overnight, we're going to have less capacity to deal with things during the day. Stress and emotional exhaustion can make us have a shorter fuse and a lowered capacity to handle what life throws at us. We can be hangry. This specifically refers to the kind of irritability that happens when our blood sugar isn't stable and our nutritional needs aren't getting met. We can have a lowered ability or capacity to take in, process, and learn new information, which is the opposite of what a highly sensitive person is built to be able to do. If your brain is fried, it's not going to be able to effectively take on and integrate new knowledge. You can even end up developing physical symptoms. This is due to our physical health needs not getting met because we've begun to ignore or deny them in order to keep up with everyone else, or have shut down the inner voice that clues us into the things going on inside our bodies. This can manifest as things such as aches, pains, stomach upset, etc. We can develop mental health struggles like OCD, anxiety, depression, etc. We can become hypervigilant or have a general mistrust of others. If we've had to cope and survive by paying attention to people around us and have learned to be skeptical about people's behavior and intentions, if we've been hurt or betrayed or have our needs dangled in front of us as a way to manipulate us, all these types of things can lead to us using our hyper-awareness capabilities as a way to avoid danger or pain in the future, thus leading to us being almost neurotic about how we approach situations and relationships. For the same types of reasons as just mentioned, we can also tend towards things like people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, and lowering ourselves on our own priority list. We can even become emotionally manipulative or selfish, trying hard to get the needs met that haven't been met previously. Looking at this list, you might think that this couldn't be possible for a highly sensitive person who is known to be sensitive, observant, have a great deal of empathy, and is built to effectively process a great deal of information. But when our systems are stressed and taxed, we aren't able to show up in the world the way that we were meant to. And truthfully speaking, all of these things on the stressed list here can all be characteristics of anyone who is stressed, highly sensitive or not. But the point is, you can feel like you are not experiencing or displaying the positive aspects of the trait when in a chronically stressed state, which is what I want to point out to you. What I want to make clear is that just because you haven't had a great mental capacity, haven't had the ability to pay much attention to the feelings of those around you, or haven't been noticing or remembering or even hearing or picking up on things in your environment that you think you should have, this doesn't mean that you are not an HSP. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or that you are a defective or broken HSP. What it does mean is that you're an HSP who is in need of more support and most likely has had some needs that haven't been properly met. One of the most common things HSPs feel before they discover the trait is that when compared to others around them, they feel like there's something wrong with them because they are so different, or things don't come as easily for them or seem more challenging. One of the saddest things that I've seen in an HSP who finds out about the trait is that after finally having that feeling of there being something wrong with them dissipate, it only returns once more once they realize that they aren't displaying the good aspects of the trait, and now feel like they are a broken HSP. An HSP who isn't demonstrating and experiencing all the good things about being an HSP, so therefore there must be something wrong with them. I truly believe that this is not true, and that once an irritable, insensitive, overwhelmed, stressed, non-observant HSP gets the support they need, through their environment, those around them, helpful information, and their own self-support, they can and will start to see themselves transform into a version of themselves that does 100% display all of those fantastic things about being an HSP. And to back up these statements of my own ideas, I'm going to share with you some quotes from written pieces discussing the trait. When a past experience was very bad, an HSP can overgeneralize and avoid or feel anxious in too many situations, just because the new ones resemble in some way the past bad one. This is a quote from Dr. Elaine Aron in her author's note of her book, The Highly Sensitive Person. This type of thinking can turn into mistrust and hypervigilance that isn't always warranted. This is because of the way our highly sensitive brains work, which we'll be talking more about in part 2 of the All About HSPs module. But essentially, this tendency is due to the fact that we experience our emotions so intensely and deeply integrate the emotional association with our experiences, and therefore have a great capacity to use this information to learn from these experiences, making us deeply consider our past when interacting with our present. When we are worn out, we may be the least aware of anything, subtle or gross, except our own need for a break. This is another quote from Dr. Elaine Aron from the same book as the previous quote. These types of quotes confirm my theory that a stressed HSP can actually be incredibly insensitive and non-observant, the opposite of what the trait is typically known for. Also, I want to mention another quote here. Fortunately, there is so much variation in the trait's genetics that if a study says that most HSPs have this or that gene or behavior, but you don't have to worry that you are not really an HSP. You score high in the self-test, and that self-test is a pretty close fit with known variations in both the dopamine and serotonin systems. That is, your whatever it is but sensitivity for now innate trait, in whatever quirky way it operates, is real. So we're going to be talking more about this dopamine serotonin system thing later, but I just want to point out here that this quote makes it clear that even if you don't identify with every single thing about the trait, that doesn't mean that you're not an HSP. So if you are right now maybe temporarily not displaying some of these things, again, doesn't mean you're not an HSP or that you're a broken HSP. It may just mean that you need more support, which is totally understandable. All right, so that wraps up part 1 of HSP 101. So let's just go over the summary about defining the trait. High sensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity is a personality trait that is genetic and inherited. It exists in 15 to 20% of the population among over 100 different species and is not specific to any age, culture, race, origin, or gender. As HSPs, we have innate differences to our nervous system that make us highly sensitive to and in tune with our surroundings and internal states. We process information deeply and thoroughly, especially information that is social in nature, which can give us advantages when it comes to noticing things others may not and careful decision making. However, it can also make us more vulnerable to overstimulation from our environment. Because of how connected to and affected we are by our environment, how supportive or unsupportive our environment is plays a key role in our well-being. And there is nothing wrong with you for being highly sensitive. It is a natural, normal, and valuable trait to possess in society. If you feel you have not done well in the past as a highly sensitive person, don't assume it's you. Rather, look to adjust your environment and get better support. All right, that wraps up part 1. I hope all of this has made sense to you and given you a lot of good, valuable information on defining the highly sensitive trait. When you're ready, you can go ahead and move on to part 2, which will be all about the brain of a highly sensitive person. I also want to include my full list of resources that I use to make the HSP 101 modules, parts 1 through 3, at the end of each of these modules.
And that concludes this video in the 3-part series, so if you really enjoyed this one, I highly recommend you go check out the other 2. In my full online program where these HSP 101 modules came from, I also have additional modules on the HSP trait, as well as exercises and worksheets and journaling prompts to help you deepen your understanding and appreciation of the highly sensitive trait. And if you're interested, you can learn more about that program in the links in the description.